Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
Byron.
an offender at the Crossroads Correctional Center. You may start the conversation now.
This is A Mind Unconstrained. I'm Byron Case, an imprisoned writer and poet. I just entered my 25th year of a life sentence for a murder that I didn't commit. Prison can be tough, but one thing that's helped sustain me for the past 2.5 decades has been my writing. I published my work in magazines, literary journals, and anthologies, and I also blogged from prison for quite a few years before I launched A Mind Unconstrained. I think of this podcast and its companion newsletter as evidence that in spite of my sentence of life without parole, I don't have to think or live like a lifer. My mind is free to wander. There was a big upset last week that if you've been listening to this podcast and paying attention, you already caught the gist of. A few days after I wrote my Substack post about waiting to transfer, the powers that be shipped me out. And let me tell you, it was an ordeal. Transfers always are, though. It's just like moving house. You've got to pack up all your possessions into cardboard boxes. But unlike moving house, you also have to assume that the people who are going to be handling your stuff are going to be from a tribe of careless oafs who've got zero respect for other people or their property. Things get broken, sometimes irreplaceable things. So I took 3 hours to strategically pack the night before I left to avoid any damage to my precious typewriter, my TV, my CD collection, or my art supplies. They ended up opening my door at 2:45 the following morning, and it was, surprisingly, a pretty easy wake-up. My cellmate sat up on his bed and waved in this kind of half-hearted way that I actually appreciated. We had celled together for about 4 years, and that's the longest that I've ever lived with someone in prison. After that much time, I think that a person can get complacent and forget about the problematic personality and lifestyle differences that really tend to pop up in this environment. So I just basically waved him back and wished him luck finding a decent replacement. I didn't know what I'd be walking into at Crossroads Correctional Center, and this was almost unprecedented for me because historically I've been an anxiety-riddled student of what if, yet I was not in the least bit preoccupied by worry because I just sort of figured it was out of my hands, and that made me feel weirdly liberated. Que sera, sera, all that. So I shut my cell door for the last time and then had to stand around in the wing waiting to be released from the house for about 45 minutes. And prison is a very different place at night. It's actually quiet and dimly lit, both of which I happen to like. So yeah, standing there might have been boring for some people, but I appreciated the quiet. I knew the rest of the day was going to be like living through a riot. The housing unit finally released me to intake a little after 3 a.m., and it was as raucous as I expected. Some guards, after I waited in line, ran me through a body scanner to identify if I had any contraband. Spoiler alert, I didn't. And then they herded me into what I can only call a bullpen with like 17 prisoners, about half of whom were treating the experience like a class reunion. That is, if a class reunion were held in a series of adjacent plexiglass cubes that you had to yell very, very, very loudly to be heard between. At one point, this skeletal young white kid started having withdrawals and just crumpled to the floor. And so people started banging on the steel door to get a guard's attention, which would be easier to do if the guards weren't so jaded from seeing the same thing several times a day when just about every other group of transfers came through. So after the guys banged and shouted for 15 minutes or so, there was a lieutenant who finally opened the door and told the kid he was out of luck, that medical staff were not going to do anything for him. And soon after that, the kid just got up and went back to his place on the concrete bench. I don't know if he was faking or not. Time in the bullpen, time did weird things. The smell was terrible. It was all halitosis and BO and that very special, uniquely sour musk that's specific to prison, only turned up to 11 because it was a small space. So it made the total hours that we sat there seem to really, really drag. They did feed us at one point. Brown bag breakfasts. You got 2 PB&Js, a box of raisins, and 5 duplex cookies. So, well-rounded meal. They also gave us bottled water, which I knew better than to guzzle down. There's no toilet on the bus, and they don't make pit stops. So you really need to strike that balance with your fluid intake. But from my previous transfer experience, I also assumed I'd get to bring the bottle with me onto the bus. Around the same time I was halfway through eating my raisins, a guard rolled in this 30-gallon trash can through the door and told us to throw everything into it that we'd been given. Everything. I tried to hang on to my water and half of the box of raisins, but he reiterated quite sternly that he did mean everything. So I just took a final swig from my bottle and hamstered the raisins, and that was that. Next up was a group strip search, and let me tell you, if you've never experienced getting naked with 15 to 20 strangers for the least fun game of Simon Says imaginable, well, lucky you. Take my word for this. Unless you've got a very particular kink, you can safely erase assembly line style orifice checks from your bucket list. Everybody picked up our underwear, socks, and shoes up off the floor, and then climbed into randomly sized orange jumpsuits. You've seen these. Jails use them all the time. Prisons not so much, though. Here in Missouri, they're basically exclusive to prisoners being transported, these orange jumpsuits. My own jumpsuit was a 4X, so the waist was kind of drooping around mid-thigh level, but, loose will always be better than too tight. Then we got cuffed, chained, and shackled. And these handcuffs, they're not your standard police cuffs with, those 2 or 3 links of chain between them. They are nasty things with a hinge where the chain would otherwise be. So once your wrists are secured, left over right, palms down, the guard will slide a sadistic metal box over the hinge that keeps the cuffs from actually having any hint of flexibility, and so your wrists are stuck in that position until they pull you off your bus at your final destination, which for me couldn't have been farther away. Crossroads is the westernmost maximum security facility in the state. The place I just left is to the farthest east. So yeah, when the guard who padlocked my cuffs to a chain around my waist said, "Oh man, you're in for a long day," he was not wrong. Now there wasn't a clock, but my guess is that we finally boarded the bus at 6 a.m. And I was kind of amazed that I didn't fall forward and break my wrists, because those 4 steps up into the bus feel pretty precarious when you're shackled. Unlike everything else you might have seen in prison, movies or on TV, depictions of the bus are 100% spot on, dead to rights accurate. It is exactly like what they show in Con Air or that one Fast and Furious movie where Vin Diesel gets sprung by a handful of beautiful young people driving overmodded Japanese coupes, except, there were no fast cars and the only furious people were the ones sitting close to the old man who kept passing gas. Me, I got a window seat over the rear wheel well right under an air conditioner vent that helped keep me upwind of that old guy for the whole first leg of the trip. A lot of times people call the bus the vomit comet, but really that's just because of the squirrely route that the drivers take through these twisting up and down rural highways that cut through the dense woodland here in Missouri. Last time that I passed through them, I almost puked. This time I was fine. The difference, I think, lay in the fact that the worst curves are on the eastern side of the state, whereas roads and, basically everything else gets more boring the closer you get to Iowa. So either everyone got used to him as the trip wore on, or the old man stopped farting. I really don't know which it was. But either way, complaints sort of shifted over the course of the ride to the urine-related variety. Like I said, there's no toilet on the bus, so after a couple of hours, people started to get a little on edge, and a few started to insult the driver's mother and act generally pissy. I was amazed when we made it to the transport hub in Jefferson City without anyone just emptying their bladder on the floor, because that definitely happened last time. But at the transport hub, passengers, prisoners, get divided up by the institution that they're bound for. So all of the people who are bound for Crossroads just sort of marinated in the funk of another bullpen for another indeterminate stretch of time. And then just as we were about to disembark, a different old man, a decidedly less flatulent one, thank goodness, said that he was having chest pains. And so everyone started banging on the cage and rallied to get a guard's attention, shouting out, like, "Man down," and "We got an emergency down here," until this weirdly upbeat sergeant finally decided to come down and see what was going on. He called for some nurses, and they checked the guy's pulse.
This call is from a correctional facility and may be monitored and recorded.
Oh, that's Claire, and she's not a nurse. She just breaks in from time to time to make sure that I'm not talking about anything I'm not supposed to. But they checked the man's pulse and respiration and blood pressure and then just cleared him for travel, and away we went. So the second lag of the day-long trip was decidedly harder slog than the first. There was, I think, a 206-degree heat index, and don't bother looking it up. I'm sure that number's accurate and scientifically verifiable. So naturally, the bus's AC faded and died within about a half hour of us leaving Jefferson City. And so for the rest of the 3-hour trip, everybody was just miserable, guards and prisoners alike. And cracking the windows open basically just turned the bus into a rolling convection oven. So at that point, most of us just started falling asleep. I think I was the only person who stayed awake the entire trip. And when a rumble strip or a bump in the road woke these people up, they'd complain for a little while about the sleep making them even sweatier and then fall right back asleep. Aside from telling 2 guards my last name, I didn't speak a single word to anyone after I left the housing unit in Bonne Terre that morning. The noise, the stink, and the heat, I just kind of treated all of it like a one-day meditation retreat. Like, my thinking was, could I practice mindful awareness with a minimum of judgment? It was a test, and I think I passed it because pulling into Crossroads was not the end of our journey. We still needed to be photographed and interviewed by case management staff, seen by medical, and then fitted for clothing. And there was a guard overseeing that little parade who remarked to me at one point that she said, "You're very patient," and I just shrugged. This facility where I spent the first 16 years of my sentence is, it's very different now. Way more laid back, and I would say even somewhat lax. I was gone for close to a decade, but I still keep seeing familiar faces. Like today, I ran into a guy that I was in the county jail with when both of us were still awaiting trial. And he walked past me and then kind of doubled back for another look, and then he just smiled this huge smile and gave me a big hug. And I think there is, just like any other shared experience that is traumatic, there's a camaraderie with those of us who've gone through the court system, legitimately or otherwise, that develops. And I look forward to catching up with a couple of those guys and seeing how the years that we've been out of contact have changed them. Now that I'm just an hour away, people from my hometown, Kansas City, are already making plans to visit. And I can hardly wait to see what they've done to the visiting room, but I'm more excited to see the people willing to drive up here and see me. Despite what I willingly gave up and might have inadvertently lost, I think transferring back was a great decision. That's it for Remind Unconstrained this week. I'm Byron Case. Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard here, new episodes drop on Fridays. You can also direct your browser to amindunconstrained.substack.com and subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get a new post in your inbox every Wednesday. I love getting questions, suggestions for future episodes, and comments, all of which you can leave on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. Ratings, reviews, and shares help A Mind Unconstrained get further into the world and are much appreciated. So until next time, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be safe, may you be at ease.
The caller has hung up.